The moment people decide your dignity has a price is the moment they reveal the poverty of their own character. The grand ballroom of the Castellano estate glowed beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm golden light across polished marble floors, where every reflection seemed to whisper wealth, influence, and old traditions. Elegant string music floated through the air, while servers in perfectly pressed uniforms moved silently between guests carrying silver trays filled with sparkling glasses and carefully arranged appetizers. Among them walked Naomi Carter, a beautiful black maid of about 30 years old whose calm eyes and graceful posture never hinted at how many silent judgments she endured each day. She adjusted the crisp white apron over her neat black uniform, offered every guest the same respectful smile, and continued serving with quiet professionalism. She knew many people inside the mansion barely noticed her unless something went wrong, yet she refused to let bitterness become part of who she was. Tonight was supposed to be another formal charity gathering attended by politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and influential families. Every detail had been rehearsed for weeks, and Naomi had memorized every table assignment, every dietary request, and every schedule without making a single complaint. On the upper balcony overlooking the ballroom stood Adrian Castellano, the 43-year-old White Mafia Boss, whose tailored black suit, calm expression, and commanding presence drew respect without demanding attention. His dark brown slicked-back hair carried natural strands of silver, matching the short beard that framed his strong jaw. Black and gray tattoos disappeared beneath the open collar of his black shirt, while others covered his neck and hands, telling stories nobody dared ask about. Instead of joining the celebration immediately, Adrian quietly observed the room from above, believing a leader learned more by watching than by speaking. His sharp brown eyes followed every movement without revealing what he thought. Down below, Naomi approached a circle of wealthy guests seated near the center fountain. As she carefully placed crystal glasses on the table, one elegantly dressed woman suddenly reached toward her own neck and gasped dramatically. The room nearby became unusually quiet. The woman stood and announced that her priceless family necklace had disappeared. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. Before Naomi could even understand what was happening, another guest pointed directly at her with a confident smile that carried neither evidence nor kindness. Several voices immediately agreed that the maid had been standing closest to the jewelry. Naomi blinked in disbelief, her hands remaining steady despite the growing tension around her. She politely explained that she had only been serving drinks and had never touched anyone's personal belongings. Her calm response only encouraged more whispers. One guest laughed softly and suggested that people from humble backgrounds sometimes forgot the difference between opportunity and temptation. Another insisted that everyone knew how these situations usually ended. The accusations spread faster than facts, carried from table to table until strangers who had witnessed nothing began looking at Naomi with suspicion. Then the woman claiming to own the necklace folded her arms and declared that if Naomi truly respected the family hosting the evening, she should kneel and apologize until the missing jewelry was found. A heavy silence settled across the ballroom. Some guests looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Others watched with open curiosity, treating the moment like unexpected entertainment. Naomi felt dozens of eyes resting upon her, each waiting to see whether she would surrender her dignity to satisfy people who had already judged her guilty. She lowered her eyes for only a brief second, gathering the strength that years of hardship had quietly taught her. Above the ballroom, Adrian Castellano did not move. His expression remained perfectly calm, but his gaze never left Naomi. Unknown to everyone below, he had witnessed every word, every gesture, and every face from the very beginning. And while the guests believed they were judging a maid, someone far more powerful had already begun judging them. Naomi Carter slowly lifted her eyes from the polished marble floor, not because she accepted the accusation, but because she refused to let humiliation become the final chapter of her story. The ballroom remained silent except for the distant sound of the string quartet, whose elegant melody now felt strangely disconnected from the tension filling the room. She looked at the woman accusing her and spoke with remarkable calm, explaining that she had never touched the necklace and that every moment of her evening had been spent serving guests exactly as instructed. Her voice never trembled. She did not raise it. She simply told the truth. Instead of easing the tension, her composure seemed to irritate those who had already decided guilt was easier to believe than innocence. Several guests exchanged knowing smiles as though confidence itself had become suspicious. One gentleman remarked that people in service often became invisible until something valuable disappeared. Another quietly agreed, repeating assumptions that sounded polished enough to resemble facts even though none of them had witnessed anything. Naomi recognized those expressions. They were not looking at her as an individual. They were looking at a story they had invented long before she entered the room. Around the edges of the ballroom, several members of the household staff watched helplessly. They knew Naomi better than anyone. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, checking every dining room, arranging every flower, helping new employees understand their responsibilities, and quietly correcting mistakes before guests could ever notice them. When someone became overwhelmed, she was usually the first to offer assistance without expecting recognition. She remembered birthdays, covered extra shifts, and never allowed frustration to shape the way she treated others. Respect had always been something she chose to give freely, even when she rarely received it in return. That quiet strength had earned the admiration of every employee inside the estate, although few powerful visitors had ever taken enough time to notice. Tonight, those same co-workers wanted to defend her, yet fear held them in place. They understood how quickly one careless word could cost them the careers they depended upon. Naomi noticed their worried expressions and gently shook her head almost imperceptibly, silently asking them not to sacrifice themselves for her. She would carry the burden alone if necessary. High above the ballroom, Adrian Castellano remained motionless behind the carved stone railing of the upper gallery. His calm brown eyes shifted from Naomi to every guest participating in the accusations. He watched who spoke first, who encouraged the crowd, who stayed silent, and who lowered their gaze in discomfort. Years of leadership had taught him that truth rarely appeared during the loudest moment. It revealed itself through patience, observation, and the small decisions people believed nobody important was watching. Without drawing attention to himself, Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and sent a brief message to his chief of security. Seconds later, two trusted staff members quietly disappeared from the ballroom toward the surveillance office without interrupting the evening. No guest noticed. No announcement was made. Down below, the woman accusing Naomi crossed her arms with growing confidence, believing the silence around her was proof that everyone accepted her version of events. Naomi remained standing with quiet dignity, her hands folded gently before her, refusing to answer cruelty with anger. The room believed it had already reached its conclusion. Only one man understood that the real story had not even begun, and somewhere inside the estate, a security monitor was about to reveal a detail that would change everything. The security office beneath the east wing of the estate remained as quiet as the ballroom above, except for the soft hum of surveillance monitors displaying every hallway, entrance, and reception room from dozens of carefully positioned cameras. Adrian Castellano entered without announcing himself, accompanied only by his chief of security, whose years of service had taught him never to mistake silence for hesitation. Without removing his calm gaze from the nearest screen, Adrian asked for every recording beginning 1 hour before the guests arrived. He did not ask whether Naomi was innocent or guilty because he had already learned that truth deserved evidence instead of assumptions. The footage began showing employees making final preparations, musicians tuning their instruments, florists arranging centerpieces, and servers carrying polished trays into the ballroom. Naomi appeared repeatedly, greeting co-workers with a warm smile, helping a nervous young employee straighten folded napkins, replacing a cracked glass before anyone noticed it, and quietly assisting an elderly housekeeper with a heavy storage box. Every movement reflected discipline rather than distraction. Adrian continued watching without speaking. Minutes passed until another camera position near the entrance revealed the wealthy woman who had claimed her necklace was missing. She greeted several guests with dramatic enthusiasm before stepping toward a decorative mirror beside the grand staircase. While adjusting her evening shawl, she briefly unclasped the necklace herself and placed it inside a small satin handbag hanging from her shoulder. A nearby guest interrupted her conversation, causing her to turn away before fastening the clasp again. The recording continued naturally as she walked into the ballroom, carrying the same handbag. Nobody noticed what had happened because nobody had been looking. Adrian quietly requested another camera angle. A second recording confirmed the same sequence from across the hall. The necklace had never disappeared. It had remained inside the woman's own handbag from the very beginning. The chief of security looked toward Adrian, expecting immediate orders, yet the mafia boss remained completely composed. He instructed the staff to preserve every recording, collect additional camera angles, and verify the exact timeline before anyone confronted the guests. Accuracy mattered more than speed. Upstairs, the atmosphere inside the ballroom had become increasingly uncomfortable. Naomi still stood where she had been accused, refusing to lower herself simply because strangers demanded it. Some guests had grown restless, whispering that the delay itself proved guilt, while others quietly questioned whether events had unfolded too quickly. The musicians continued performing, though even they sensed the unusual tension surrounding the center of the room. Several members of the household staff exchanged worried glances, hoping someone would finally speak on Naomi's behalf. She offered them a reassuring smile that seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. Her dignity remained untouched because it had never depended upon the opinions surrounding her. Adrian finally turned away from the monitors and buttoned his tailored black jacket with measured confidence. His expression remained calm, but there was now complete certainty behind his eyes. He did not intend to embarrass anyone unnecessarily, nor would he allow false accusations to pass without consequence. As he stepped toward the staircase leading back to the ballroom, every employee who crossed his path instinctively moved aside, sensing that the silence protecting the truth was about to end, and that the next few minutes would forever change how every person inside the Castellano estate understood the meaning of respect. Adrian Castellano descended the sweeping marble staircase with the same measured pace that had earned him respect long before he ever spoke a word. Conversations faded one by one until only the distant sound of violin strings remained beneath the vaulted ceiling. Nobody announced his arrival because nobody needed to. His quiet presence alone was enough to command the attention of every guest gathered inside the ballroom. Naomi Carter remained standing exactly where she had been moments earlier, her posture calm despite the pressure surrounding her. She neither pleaded for sympathy nor argued against the accusations. She simply waited, believing that truth did not become stronger by shouting. Adrian stopped a few feet from the center of the room and slowly looked across every face gathered before him. His eyes rested briefly on the guests who had spoken most confidently, then on the employees who had remained silent out of fear, and finally on Naomi herself. She met his gaze without resentment, only quiet dignity. Adrian spoke in a calm, even voice that carried effortlessly throughout the ballroom. He thanked everyone for their patience and explained that no judgment would ever be made inside his home without verified facts. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. The woman who had reported the missing necklace folded her arms, convinced that the estate owner would naturally support her version of events. Adrian gently raised one hand toward his chief of security, who stepped forward carrying a tablet connected to the estate surveillance system. The large display near the ballroom entrance illuminated with recorded footage from earlier that evening. Every guest turned toward the screen. Without dramatic music or emotional narration, the recording simply showed events exactly as they had happened. The elegant woman paused beside the entrance mirror, unclasped her own necklace while adjusting her shawl, and carefully placed it inside the satin handbag hanging from her shoulder before becoming distracted by another conversation. A second camera angle confirmed the identical sequence with perfect clarity. The ballroom became completely silent. Nobody whispered. Nobody moved. The woman instinctively reached into her handbag with trembling fingers. A moment later, she slowly withdrew the necklace that everyone believed had vanished. The sparkling diamonds reflected beneath the crystal chandeliers exactly as they had before the evening began. Her confident expression disappeared, replaced by disbelief and embarrassment. Several guests who had eagerly repeated accusations lowered their eyes, suddenly unwilling to meet anyone else's gaze. Adrian did not raise his voice or humiliate anyone in return. He simply looked around the room and said that assumptions built upon appearance could never become evidence, no matter how many influential people repeated them. He then turned toward Naomi and thanked her for remaining composed when others had failed to offer her the fairness she deserved. The sincerity of those words echoed far more powerfully than anger ever could. Naomi nodded respectfully, offering only a quiet smile that revealed relief rather than triumph. She did not seek revenge because recovering her dignity mattered more than watching someone else lose theirs. Yet Adrian was not finished. He calmly informed every guest that respect toward every employee inside the Castellano estate was not optional, but a condition of remaining welcome within its walls. Those unwilling to honor that principle would not receive another invitation regardless of wealth, status, or influence. A profound silence settled over the ballroom once again, but this time it carried something entirely different. It carried the unmistakable realization that the evening had stopped being about a misplaced necklace and had become a lesson every person present would remember long after they walked out of the estate, while one final decision from Adrian still remained unspoken. The silence that followed Adrian Castellano's words lingered longer than anyone expected. The crystal chandeliers still shimmered above the ballroom, yet the atmosphere had changed completely. Only minutes earlier, whispers had traveled from guest to guest with remarkable confidence. Now those same voices had disappeared beneath the unmistakable weight of truth. The elegant woman who had accused Naomi Carter slowly lowered her eyes, unable to escape the reality displayed before everyone. Several guests who had eagerly supported the accusation quietly stepped backward, suddenly finding the polished marble floor more interesting than the faces surrounding them. Adrian remained perfectly composed. His calm expression never shifted toward anger because he believed genuine authority never needed humiliation to prove its strength. He looked toward the woman and simply invited her to consider how quickly assumptions could destroy an innocent person's reputation. His words carried no sarcasm, only quiet disappointment. The absence of hostility made every sentence even more powerful. The woman finally gathered enough courage to apologize directly to Naomi. Her voice lacked the confidence she had displayed only moments earlier. Naomi listened respectfully without interrupting. When the apology ended, she responded with remarkable grace, saying that everyone was capable of making mistakes, but that dignity should never become the price another person paid for those mistakes. Her answer surprised the entire ballroom. Many expected resentment. Others expected anger. Instead, they witnessed compassion strengthened by self-respect. Adrian observed the exchange carefully before addressing every guest once again. He explained that the Castellano estate had always been built upon loyalty, discipline, and accountability, but from that evening forward another principle would stand beside them. Every individual, regardless of occupation, background, or social status, would receive the same fundamental respect while inside his home. Anyone unwilling to honor that expectation would no longer be welcomed to future gatherings. No exceptions would be granted because character mattered more than influence. The statement settled across the ballroom like a quiet promise rather than a threat. Members of the household staff exchanged emotional glances. Some had served inside the estate for decades without ever hearing someone of Adrian's position publicly defend employees with such unwavering conviction. A senior housekeeper discreetly wiped away tears while several younger workers stood a little taller than before. Naomi noticed their renewed confidence and realized that this moment had become larger than her own experience. It had changed something for everyone who quietly worked behind elegant doors without expecting recognition. Guests gradually resumed their conversations, yet the tone had transformed completely. Servers who moments earlier had been overlooked were now greeted with sincere thanks. Chairs were pulled aside respectfully. Simple words such as please and thank you returned to the ballroom with surprising frequency. Adrian watched these small changes with quiet satisfaction because lasting leadership rarely began with dramatic speeches. It began when ordinary behavior changed for the better. As the evening continued, the chief of security approached Adrian discreetly and handed him a sealed envelope recovered during the investigation. Inside was a handwritten note that had been found beneath the entrance console near the decorative mirror. Adrian unfolded it, read only a few lines, and his calm expression grew unexpectedly thoughtful. Without saying a word to anyone nearby, he slipped the note back into the envelope and looked toward Naomi, realizing that the misunderstanding surrounding the necklace might never have been an accident after all. and that the unanswered questions inside that letter could reveal an even deeper truth waiting beyond the end of the evening. The celebration continued long into the evening, yet the atmosphere inside the Castellano estate no longer resembled the gathering that had begun only an hour earlier. Every conversation now carried an unusual sense of reflection, as though each guest had silently reconsidered the way they viewed the people who served around them every day. Naomi Carter returned to her duties with the same quiet professionalism that had always defined her character. She accepted fresh trays from the kitchen, thanked fellow employees for their support with gentle smiles, and continued welcoming guests without allowing bitterness to shape her actions. Many visitors who had previously overlooked her now met her eyes before accepting a glass or offering a sincere word of appreciation. Those simple gestures seemed small, yet inside the grand ballroom, they represented a remarkable transformation. Adrian Castellano remained nearby, greeting longtime associates while occasionally observing the staff working throughout the estate. He noticed something that money could never purchase. Confidence had returned to the employees. Their shoulders were no longer weighed down by uncertainty. They moved with renewed pride because someone in authority had demonstrated that fairness was more than an attractive speech. It was a principle worth protecting. Later that evening, Adrian quietly walked into his private study, carrying the sealed envelope recovered near the entrance. Warm light from an antique desk lamp illuminated rows of leather-bound books, while rain began tapping softly against the tall windows overlooking the gardens. He unfolded the handwritten note once more and carefully read every line. The message was anonymous, but it revealed that someone attending the reception had deliberately encouraged suspicion toward a member of the household staff because they believed employees should always accept blame without question. The note did not identify a single person, yet it warned that similar behavior had occurred during previous gatherings involving different workers who had been too afraid to speak. Adrian slowly folded the paper and remained silent for several moments. His concern was no longer limited to Naomi's experience. If even one employee had endured quiet humiliation simply because of position or appearance, then leadership demanded more than solving one misunderstanding. The following morning, Adrian assembled the estate managers, department supervisors, and senior household staff inside the main conference room. Naomi attended reluctantly, believing she had no reason to stand before people with far greater authority. Adrian invited her to remain because the meeting concerned every individual working within the estate. He announced a new policy requiring that every complaint involving an employee would be investigated through facts before conclusions, regardless of who made the accusation. Training sessions emphasizing professionalism, accountability, and mutual respect would become mandatory for managers, security personnel, and event coordinators alike. Anonymous reporting procedures would also allow employees to raise concerns without fearing retaliation. The room remained respectfully quiet, as everyone understood the significance of these changes. Naomi felt both humbled and deeply grateful, yet she asked Adrian whether she truly deserved so much attention because of one painful evening. Adrian answered with the same calm conviction that had guided every decision since the reception. He explained that meaningful change rarely began because of comfort. It usually began because one honest person refused to surrender dignity when it would have been easier to remain silent. Naomi lowered her eyes thoughtfully, realizing the evening she wished had never happened had become the beginning of something that could protect countless others. While neither she nor Adrian knew that their renewed commitment to fairness would soon be tested in a way no written policy could possibly anticipate. Weeks passed, and the changes inside the Castellano estate slowly became visible in ways no announcement alone could have accomplished. Every new employee completed the same orientation before beginning work, learning that professionalism meant respecting every individual regardless of title, uniform, or background. Managers no longer relied upon assumptions when questions arose. They listened, verified facts, and encouraged honest communication before reaching conclusions. Naomi Carter quietly became one of the people responsible for welcoming new members of the household staff. She never considered herself a teacher, yet her patience, kindness, and unwavering professionalism naturally inspired confidence in those who had just begun their first day. She explained every responsibility carefully, reminded each employee that excellence was built through consistency rather than perfection, and encouraged them never to allow another person's opinion to define their self-worth. Her words carried unusual weight because everyone inside the estate knew she had lived through the lesson herself. Adrian Castellano occasionally observed these training sessions from the back of the room without interrupting. He noticed that new employees relaxed whenever Naomi spoke because they sensed genuine compassion instead of authority. That quiet influence impressed him more than impressive speeches ever could. Leadership, he believed, revealed itself through the ability to help others grow. News about the estate gradually spread beyond its gates. Event planners, business partners, and longtime guests began mentioning how differently employees were treated compared with other luxury properties. Visitors noticed simple details that had once gone unnoticed. Staff members were greeted by name. Questions were answered politely. Concerns were investigated fairly. Gratitude replaced entitlement in many conversations. The atmosphere felt lighter, not because fewer problems existed, but because people trusted they would be handled with integrity. One afternoon, a nervous young server accidentally dropped a tray of crystal glasses while preparing for another formal reception. The sound echoed through the hallway, causing several guests nearby to turn immediately. The young employee froze, expecting harsh criticism or immediate dismissal. Months earlier, panic would have spread through the staff. Instead, Naomi calmly walked over, asked whether the employee had been injured, and helped gather the broken pieces only after confirming everyone was safe. Adrian arrived moments later after hearing the noise. Rather than asking who was responsible, he first asked whether anyone needed medical assistance. Once he confirmed that no one had been harmed, he reminded the young employee that mistakes should become opportunities for learning, not reasons for humiliation. Relief filled the hallway. Several experienced workers quietly smiled because they realized the new culture had become more than words written inside a policy manual. It had become everyday behavior. As preparations for the evening reception continued, one of the estate managers approached Adrian with a thoughtful expression. He explained that several influential families had privately questioned the estate's new expectations regarding employee treatment. Some hinted they might host future gatherings elsewhere if required to follow those standards. Adrian listened without changing his calm expression. He thanked the manager for sharing the information and simply replied that any reputation built upon disrespect was not worth protecting. The manager nodded respectfully and left. Naomi happened to overhear only the final sentence while arranging flowers nearby. She looked toward Adrian with quiet gratitude, realizing his commitment had never depended upon convenience or popularity. Yet beyond the estate walls, those who resisted change had already begun discussing ways to challenge the principles transforming the Castellano estate, and their next move would place everything Adrian and Naomi had built under an even brighter public spotlight. Several months later, the Castellano estate had become known for something few luxury residences ever achieved. Visitors no longer spoke only about magnificent architecture, priceless artwork, or extravagant receptions. They spoke about the unusual atmosphere that greeted every person who entered. Through its front doors, from distinguished business leaders to first-time delivery drivers, everyone received the same quiet courtesy. Employees walked with confidence instead of hesitation because they knew respect was no longer a privilege reserved for status. Naomi Carter continued serving with the same grace that had always defined her character, yet her responsibilities had naturally expanded. New employees requested her guidance, experienced staff sought her advice, and department managers trusted her judgment whenever difficult situations arose. She accepted every new responsibility with humility, reminding others that leadership began with listening before speaking. Adrian Castellano watched these changes with quiet satisfaction, never claiming credit for what had become a shared commitment throughout the estate. One autumn afternoon, the estate hosted a regional gathering for owners and managers of several prestigious private residences. Many arrived expecting to study security procedures, event management, and hospitality standards. Instead, they discovered something far more memorable. During a guided tour, they noticed experienced executives thanking kitchen assistants, guests greeting housekeepers by name, and supervisors working alongside junior employees without arrogance. One visitor privately admitted that he had never witnessed such mutual respect inside a property of comparable influence. Adrian answered simply that discipline without dignity eventually became fear, while dignity strengthened discipline naturally. His words spread quickly among those attending the conference. Throughout the afternoon, Naomi demonstrated staff orientation for newly hired employees exactly as she always did. She explained practical responsibilities with patience, encouraged questions without embarrassment, and reminded everyone that excellence depended upon consistency, honesty, and compassion. The visiting managers quietly observed from the back of the room. Several later admitted they intended to introduce similar practices within their own organizations. Naomi felt slightly uncomfortable receiving so much attention because she had never sought recognition. She believed she was simply performing her duties. Adrian understood that this quiet humility explained why others trusted her so deeply. As the conference concluded, one respected estate owner approached Adrian before leaving. He confessed that he had once believed kindness weakened authority, but after spending a single day inside the Castellano estate, he had completely changed his opinion. Adrian smiled politely and replied that genuine authority never feared treating people with fairness because respect earned voluntarily lasted far longer than obedience demanded through status alone. The visitor shook his hand thoughtfully before departing. That evening, as the last guests left and golden sunset reflected across the marble courtyard, Naomi paused briefly near the entrance where everything had begun months earlier. She remembered the painful accusations, the heavy silence, and the uncertainty she had carried that night. Looking around now, she saw employees laughing together after finishing another successful event, supervisors thanking their teams, and guests offering sincere appreciation before leaving. The estate itself had not changed, yet everything inside it felt different because the people had changed. Adrian quietly joined her near the entrance and looked across the peaceful courtyard without saying much. Sometimes the strongest victories required no celebration at all. Yet neither of them realized that a familiar face had just stepped through the front gate, carrying an unexpected request that would test whether forgiveness could become as powerful as justice itself. The woman waiting near the entrance was the same elegant guest who had once accused Naomi Carter before an entire ballroom. Months had softened neither the memory nor the lesson, yet something about her expression had changed. The confidence that once demanded obedience had been replaced by quiet humility. She asked if she might speak with Naomi privately for only a few minutes. Naomi glanced toward Adrian Castellano, who responded with nothing more than a calm nod before returning to greet the remaining visitors. Trust, he believed, could never be commanded. It had to be freely chosen. Naomi invited the woman into the peaceful estate library, where late afternoon sunlight filtered through tall windows and settled across shelves filled with generations of carefully preserved books. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, the guest admitted that the night of the reception had continued to trouble her long after she returned home. Watching the surveillance recording had forced her to recognize not only her mistake, but also the prejudice hidden beneath it. She confessed that she had spent years judging people according to occupation instead of character, never realizing how deeply those assumptions could wound another human being. She explained that after leaving the estate, she had begun changing the culture within her own family business, introducing policies that required fairness, respectful communication, and proper investigation before blame. Employee turnover had fallen, teamwork had improved, and for the first time she understood that kindness and accountability could exist together. She thanked Naomi for responding to humiliation with dignity instead of hatred, because that decision had changed far more than one evening. Naomi listened quietly before answering with the same gentle sincerity that had always guided her life. She explained that forgiveness never erased painful memories, but refusing to forgive allowed those memories to control the future. Real change, she said, became meaningful only when it continued long after apologies ended. The woman smiled through grateful eyes and extended her hand. Naomi accepted it warmly. Neither victory nor defeat existed between them anymore. Only understanding. When they returned to the grand hallway, Adrian observed the exchange from across the marble floor. He needed no explanation. The calm expressions on both faces revealed everything. Later that evening, employees gathered briefly before leaving for the night. Some were preparing for another busy week, while others laughed quietly about ordinary moments from the day. Naomi looked around the estate and realized that what had once been a workplace defined by silent fear had become a community built upon mutual respect. Adrian thanked every employee personally before they departed, just as he had quietly begun doing after the reception months earlier. No announcement celebrated the transformation. No newspaper recorded it. Yet every person walking through the front doors could feel the difference without anyone needing to explain it. As the final lights dimmed beneath the crystal chandeliers and the estate settled into peaceful silence, Adrian paused beside the entrance where everything had first begun. Naomi stood nearby, preparing to leave after another ordinary day that no longer felt ordinary at all. They exchanged a simple smile of mutual respect before walking in different directions, each understanding that true leadership and true dignity were never measured by wealth, influence, or titles. They were measured by the choices people made when another person's worth was placed in their hands. And on that quiet evening, the Castellano estate no longer stood as a symbol of power alone. It stood as a reminder that respect offered freely could transform hearts more completely than fear ever could. And that day, everyone who entered its doors remembered what human dignity truly looked like.